Often it happens, as in Russia, that a man came in with a chip on his shoulder. He woke up that way, as if struck by a monsoon. 9 times out of 10, he was a good fellow, a fellow whom everyone liked. But when the rage came on, nothing could stop him. He was like a horse with the blind staggers, and the best thing you could do for him was to shoot him on the spot. It always happens that way with peaceable people. One day they run amok. In America, they're constantly running amok. What they need is an outlet for their energy, for their bloodlust. Europe is bled regularly by war. America is pacifistic and cannibalistic. Outwardly, it seems to be a beautiful honeycomb with all the drones crawling over each other in a frenzy of work. Inwardly, it's a slaughterhouse, each man killing off his neighbor and sucking the juice from his bones. Superficially, it looks like a bold, masculine world. Actually, it's a whorehouse, run by women, with the native sons acting as pimps, and the bloody foreigners selling their flesh. Nobody knows what it is to sit on his ass and be content. That happens only in the films, where everything is faked, even the fires of hell. The whole continent is sound asleep, and in that sleep, a grand nightmare is taking place. Nobody could have slept more soundly than I in the midst of this nightmare. The war, when it came along, made only a sort of faint rumble in my ears. Like my compatriots, I was pacifistic and cannibalistic. The millions who were put away in the carnage passed away in a cloud, much like the Aztecs passed away, and the Incas, and the Red Indians, and the buffaloes. People pretended to be profoundly moved, but they weren't. They were simply tossing fitfully in their sleep. No one lost his appetite. No one got up and rang the fire alarm. The day I first realized that there had been a war was about 6 months or so after the armistice. It was in a streetcar on the 14th Street Crosstown line. One of our heroes, a Texas lad with a string of medals across his chest, happened to see an officer passing on the sidewalk. The sight of the officer enraged him. He was a sergeant himself, and he probably had good reason to be sore. Anyway, the sight of the officer enraged him, so that he got up from his seat and began to bawl the shit out of the government. The army, the civilians, the passengers in the car, everybody and everything. He said if there was ever another war, they couldn't drag him to it with a 20-mule team. He said he'd see every son of a bitch killed before he'd go again himself. He said he didn't give a fuck about the medals they decorated him with, and to show that he meant it, he ripped them off and threw them out the window. He said if he was ever in a trench with an officer again, he'd shoot him in the back like a dirty dog, and that held good for General Pershing or any other general. He said a lot more, with some fancy cuss words that he'd picked up over there, and nobody opened his trap to gainsay him. And when he got through, I felt for the first time that there had really been a war, and that the man I was listening to had been in it, and that despite his bravery, the war had made him a coward, and that if he did any more killing, it would be wide awake and in cold blood, and nobody would have the guts to send him to the electric chair because he had performed his duty toward his fellow men, which was to deny his own sacred instincts. And so everything was just and fair because one crime washes away the other in the name of God, country, and humanity. Peace be with you all. And the second time I experienced the reality of war was when ex-Sergeant Griswold, one of our night messengers, flew off the handle one day and smashed the office to bits at one of the railway stations. They sent him to me to give him the gate, but I didn't have the heart to fire him. He had performed such a beautiful piece of destruction that I felt more like hugging and squeezing him. I was only hoping to Christ he would go up to the 25th floor, or wherever it was that the president and the vice presidents had their offices, and mop up the whole bloody gang. But in the name of discipline, and to uphold the bloody farce it was, I had to do something to punish him, or be punished for it myself. And so, not knowing what less I could do, I took him off the commission basis and put him back on a salary basis. He took it pretty badly, not realizing exactly where I stood, either for him or against him. And so I got a letter from him pronto saying that he was going to pay me a visit in a day or two, and I better watch out because he was going to take it out of my hide. He said he'd come up after office hours, and that if I was afraid, I'd better have some strong-armed men around to look after me. I knew he meant every word he said, and I felt pretty damn quaky when I put the letter down. I waited in for him alone, however, feeling that it would be even more cowardly to ask for protection. It was a strange experience. He must have realized the moment he laid eyes on me that I was a son of a bitch and a lying, stinking hypocrite, as he had called me in his letter. I was only that because he was what he was, which wasn't a hell of a lot better. He must have realized immediately that we were both in the same boat, and the bloody boat was leaking pretty badly. I could see something like that going on in him as he strode forward, outwardly still furious, still foaming at the mouth, but inwardly all spent, all soft and feathery. As for myself, what fear I had vanished the moment I saw him enter. Just being there quiet and alone and being less strong, less capable of defending myself, gave me the drop on him. Not that I wanted to have the drop on him either, but it had turned out that way, and I took advantage of it naturally. The moment he sat down, he went soft as putty. He wasn't a man anymore, but just a big child. There must be millions of them like him, big children with machine guns who could wipe out whole regiments without batting an eyelash. But back in the work trenches, without a weapon, without a clear, visible enemy, they were helpless as ants. Everything revolved about the question of food, the food and the rent. That was all there was to fight about. But there was no way, no clear, visible way to fight for it. It was like seeing an army strong and well-equipped, capable of licking anything in sight, and yet ordered to retreat every day, to retreat and retreat and retreat because that was the strategic thing to do, even though it meant losing ground, losing guns, losing ammunition, losing food, losing sleep, losing courage, losing life itself, finally. Wherever there were men fighting for food and rent, there was this retreat going on, in the fog, in the night, for no earthly reason except that it was the strategic thing to do. It was eating the heart out of him. To fight was easy, but to fight for food and rent was like fighting an army of ghosts. All you could do was to retreat. And while you retreated, you watched your own brothers getting popped off one after the other, silently, mysteriously, in the fog, in the dark, and not a thing to do about it. He was so damn confused, so perplexed, so hopelessly muddled and beaten that he put his head in his arms and wept on my desk. And while he's sobbing like that, suddenly the telephone rings, and it's the vice president's office. Never the vice president himself, but always his office. And they want this man Griswold fired immediately, and I say, "Yes, sir." And I hang up. I don't say anything to Griswold about it, but I walk home with him, and I have dinner with him, and his wife and kids. And when I leave him, I say to myself that if I have to fire that guy, somebody's going to pay for it. And anyway, I want to know first where the order comes from and why. And hot and sullen, I go right up to the vice president's office in the morning, and I ask to see the vice president himself. And did you give the order, I ask, and why? And before he has a chance to deny it or to explain his reason for it, I give him a little war stuff, straight from the shoulder, and where he don't like it and can't take it. And if you don't like it, Mr. Will Twill Dilliger, you can take the job, my job, and his job, and you can shove them up your ass. And like that, I walk out on him. I go back to the slaughterhouse, and I go about my work as usual. I expect, of course, that I'll get the sack before the day's over, but nothing of the kind. No, to my amazement, I get a telephone call from the general manager saying to take it easy, to just calm down a bit. Yes, just go easy. Don't do anything hasty. We'll look into it, etc. I guess they're still looking into it because Griswold went on working just as always. In fact, they even promoted him to a clerkship, which was a dirty deal too, because as a clerk, he earned less money than as a messenger. But it saved his pride, and it also took a little more of the spunk out of him too, no doubt. Well, that's what happens to a guy when he's just a hero in his sleep. Unless the nightmare is strong enough to wake you up, you go right on retreating, and either you end up on a bench, or you end up as vice president. It's all one and the same. A bloody fucking mess. A farce. A fiasco from start to finish. I know it as was in it because I woke up. And when I woke up, I walked out on it. I walked out by the same door that I had walked in without as much as a "by your leave, sir." Things take place instantaneously. But there's a long process to be gone through first. What you get when something happens is only the explosion, and the second before that, the spark. But everything happens according to law, and with the full consent and collaboration of the whole cosmos. Before I could get up and explode, the bomb had to be properly prepared, properly primed. After putting things in order for the bastards up above, I had to be taken down from my high horse, had to be kicked around like a football, had to be stepped on, squelched, humiliated, fettered, manacled, made impotent as a jellyfish. All my life, I had never wanted for friends, but at this particular period, they seemed to spring up around me like mushrooms. I never had a moment to myself. If I went home of a night, hoping to take a rest, somebody would be there waiting to see me. Sometimes a gang of them would be there, and it didn't seem to make much difference whether I came or not. Each set of friends I made despised the other set. Stanley, for example, despised the whole lot. Ulrich, too, was rather scornful of the others. He had just come back from Europe after an absence of several years. We hadn't seen much of each other since boyhood, and then one day, quite by accident, we met on the street. That day was an important day in my life because it opened up a new world to me. A world I had often dreamed about but never hoped to see. I remember vividly that we were standing on the corner of 6th Avenue and 49th Street toward dusk. I remember it because it seemed utterly incongruous to be listening to a man talking about Mount Etna and Vesuvius and Capri and Pompeii and Morocco and Paris on the corner of 6th Avenue and 49th Street, Manhattan. I remember the way he looked about as he talked, like a man who hadn't quite realized that he was in for it, but who vaguely sensed that he had made a horrible mistake in returning. His eyes seemed to be saying all the time, "This has no value whatsoever." He didn't say that, however, but just this over and over. "I'm sure you'd like it. I'm sure it's just the place for you." When he left me, I was in a daze. I couldn't get hold of him again quickly enough. I wanted to hear it all over again in minute detail. Nothing that I had read about Europe seemed to match this glowing account from my friend's own lips. It seemed all the more miraculous to me in that we had sprung out of the same environment. He had managed it because he had rich friends and because he knew how to save money. I had never known anyone who was rich, who had traveled, who had money in the bank. All my friends were like myself, drifting from day to day and never a thought for the future. Omar, yes, he had traveled a bit, almost all over the world, but as a bum, or else in the army, which was even worse than being a bum. My friend Ulrich was the first fellow I'd ever met who I could truly say had traveled, and he knew how to talk about his experiences. As a result of that chance encounter on the street, we met frequently thereafter, for a period of several months. He used to call me in the evening after dinner, and we would stroll through the park, which was nearby. What a thirst I had. Every slightest detail about the other world fascinated me. Even now, years and years since, even now, when I know Paris like a book, his picture of Paris is still before my eyes, still vivid, still real. Sometimes, after a rain, riding swiftly through the city in a taxi, I catch fleeting glimpses of this Paris he described. Just momentary snatches, as in passing the Tuileries, perhaps, or a glimpse of Montmartre, or the Sacré-Cœur through the Rue Lafitte, or the last flush of twilight. Just a Brooklyn boy. That was an expression he used sometimes when he felt ashamed of his inability to express himself more adequately. And I was just a Brooklyn boy too, which is to say, one of the last and the least of men. But as I wander about, rubbing elbows with the world, Seldom it happens that I meet anyone who can describe so lovingly and faithfully what he has seen and felt. Those nights in Prospect Park with my old friend Ulrich are responsible more than anything else for my being here today. Most of the places he described for me I have still to see. Some of them I shall perhaps never see. But they live inside me, warm and vivid, just as he created them in our rambles through the park. Interwoven with this talk of the other world was the whole body and texture of Lawrence's work. Often, when the park had long been emptied, we were still sitting on a bench discussing the nature of Lawrence's ideas. Looking back on these discussions now, I can see how confused I was, how pitifully ignorant of the true meaning of Lawrence's words. Had I really understood, my life could never have taken the course it did. Most of us live the greater part of our lives submerged. Certainly in my own case, I can say that not until I left America did I emerge above the surface. Perhaps America had nothing to do with it, but the fact remains that I did not open my eyes wide and full and clear until I struck Paris. And perhaps that was only because I had renounced America, renounced my past. My friend Kronsky used to twit me about my euphorias. It was a sly way he had of reminding me, when I was extraordinarily gay, that the morrow would find me depressed. It was true. I had nothing but ups and downs, long stretches of gloom and melancholy, followed by extravagant bursts of gaiety, of trance-like inspiration. Never a level in which I was myself. It sounds strange to say so, yet I was never myself. I was either anonymous or the person called Henry Miller raised to the nth degree. In the latter mood, for instance, I could spill out a whole book to Jaime while riding a trolley car. Jaime, who never suspected me of being anything but a good employment manager. I can see his eyes now as he looked at me one night when I was in one of my states of euphoria. We had boarded the trolley at the Brooklyn Bridge to go to some flat in Greenpoint where a couple of trollops were waiting to receive us. Jaime had started to talk to me in his usual way about his wife's ovaries. In the first place, he didn't know precisely what ovaries meant, and so I was explaining it to him in crude and simple fashion. In the midst of my explanation, it suddenly seemed so profoundly tragic and ridiculous that Jaime shouldn't know what ovaries were, that I became drunk. As drunk, I mean, as if I had had a quart of whiskey under my belt. From the idea of diseased ovaries, there germinated in one lightning-like flash a sort of tropical growth made up of the most heterogeneous assortment of odds and ends, in the midst of which, securely lodged, tenaciously lodged, I might say, were Dante and Shakespeare. At the same instant, I also suddenly recalled my whole private train of thought, which had begun about the middle of the Brooklyn Bridge, and which suddenly the word ovaries had broken. I realized that everything Jaime had said up till the word ovaries had sieved through me like sand. What I had begun in the middle of the Brooklyn Bridge was what I had begun time and time again in the past, usually when walking to my father's shop, a performance which was repeated day in and day out as if in a trance. What I had begun, in brief, was a book of the hours, of the tedium and monotony of my life in the midst of a ferocious activity. Not for years had I thought of this book, which I used to write every day on my way from Delancey Street to Murray Hill. But going over the bridge, the sun setting, the skyscrapers gleaming like phosphorescent cadavers, the remembrance of the past set in. Remembrance of going back and forth over the bridge, going to a job which was death, returning to a home which was a morgue, memorizing Faust, looking down into the cemetery, spitting into the cemetery from the elevated train, the same guard on the platform every morning. An imbecile. The other imbeciles reading their newspapers. New skyscrapers going up, new tombs to work in and die in. The boats passing below, the Fall River line, the Albany Day line. Why am I going to work? What will I do tonight? The warm cunt beside me. And can I work my knuckles into her groin, run away and become a cowboy, try Alaska, the gold mine, get off and turn around? Don't die yet. Wait another day, a stroke of luck. River, end it, down, down like a corkscrew, head and shoulders in the mud, legs free. Fish will come and bite. Tomorrow a new life. Where? Anywhere. Why begin again? The same thing everywhere. Death. Death is the solution. But don't die yet. Wait another day. A stroke of luck, a new face, a new friend, millions of chances. You're too young yet. You're melancholy. You don't die yet. Wait another day. A stroke of luck. Fuck anyway. And so on over the bridge into the glass shed. Everybody glued together, worms, ants crawling out of a dead tree, and their thoughts crawling out the same way. Maybe, being up high between the two shores, suspended above the traffic, above life and death, on each side the high tombs blazing with dying sunlight, the river flowing heedlessly, flowing on like time itself. Maybe each time I passed up there, something was tugging away at me, urging me to take it in, to announce myself. Anyway, each time I passed on high, I was truly alone. And whenever that happened, the book commenced to write itself, screaming the things which I never breathed, the thoughts I never uttered, the conversations I never held, the hopes, the dreams, the delusions I never admitted. If this then was the true self, it was marvelous. And what's more, it seemed never to change, but always to pick up from the last stop, to continue in the same vein, a vein I had struck when I was a child, and went down in the street for the first time alone, and there, frozen into the dirty ice of the gutter, lay a dead cat. The first time I had looked at death and grasped it. From that moment I knew what it was to be isolated. Every object, every living thing, and every dead thing led its independent existence. My thoughts, too, led an independent existence. Suddenly, looking at Jaime and thinking of that strange word, ovaries, now stranger than any word in my whole vocabulary, this feeling of icy isolation came over me, and Jaime sitting beside me was a bullfrog, absolutely a bullfrog, nothing more. I was jumping from the bridge head first down into the primeval ooze, legs clear, and waiting for a bite. Like that Satan had plunged through the heavens, through the solid core of the earth, head down and ramming through to the very hub of the earth, the darkest, densest, hottest pit of hell. I was walking through the Mojave Desert, and the man beside me was waiting for nightfall in order to fall on me and slay me. I was walking again in dreamland, and a man was walking above me on a tightrope, and above him a man was sitting in an airplane, spelling letters of smoke in the sky. The woman hanging on my arm was pregnant, and in 6 or 7 years the thing she was carrying inside her would be able to read the letters in the sky, and he or she, or it, would know that it was a cigarette, and later would smoke the cigarette, perhaps a package a day. In the womb, nails formed on every finger, every toe. You could stop right there at a toenail, the tiniest toenail imaginable, and you could break your head over it trying to figure it out. On one side of the ledger are the books man has written. containing such a hodgepodge of wisdom and nonsense, of truth and falsehood, that if one lived to be as old as Methuselah, one couldn't disentangle the mess. On the other side of the ledger, things like toenails, hair, teeth, blood, ovaries, if you will, all incalculable, and all written in another kind of ink, in another script, an incomprehensible, undecipherable script. The bullfrog eyes were trained on me like two collar buttons stuck in cold fat. They were stuck in the cold sweat of the primeval ooze. Each collar button was an ovary that had come unglued, an illustration out of the dictionary without benefit of lucubration. Lackluster in the cold yellow fat of the eyeball, each buttoned ovary produced a subterranean chill, the skating rink of hell, where men stood upside down in the ice, the legs free and waiting for a bite. Here Dante walked unaccompanied, weighed down by his vision, and through endless circles gradually moving heavenward to be enthroned in his work. Here Shakespeare, with smooth brow, fell into the bottomless reverie of rage, to emerge in elegant quartos and innuendos. Glaucous frost of non-comprehension swept clear by gales of laughter. From the hub of the bullfrog's eye radiated clean white spokes of sheer lucidity, not to be annotated or categorized, not to be numbered or defined, but revolving sightless in kaleidoscopic change. Jaime the bullfrog was an ovarian spud generated in the high passage between two shores. For him, the skyscrapers had been built, the wilderness cleared, the Indians massacred, the buffaloes exterminated. For him, the twin cities had been joined by the Brooklyn Bridge, the caissons sunk, the cables strung from tower to tower. For him, men sat upside down in the sky, writing words in fire and smoke. For him, the anesthetic was invented, and the high forceps, and the Big Bertha, which could destroy what the eye could not see. For him, the molecule was broken down, and the atom revealed to be without substance. For him, each night the stars were swept with telescopes, and worlds coming to birth photographed in the act of gestation. For him, the barriers of time and space were set at naught, and all movement, be it the flight of birds or the revolution of the planets, expounded irrefutably and incontestably by the high priests of the depossessed cosmos. Then, as in the middle of the bridge, in the middle of a walk, in the middle always, whether of a book, a conversation, or making love, it was borne in on me again that I have never done what I wanted. And out of not doing what I wanted to do, there grew inside me this creation, which was nothing but an obsessional plant, a sort of coral growth which was expropriating everything, including life itself, until life itself became this which was denied, but which constantly asserted itself, making life and killing life at the same time. I could see it going on after death, like hair growing on a corpse. People saying death, but the hair still testifying to life. And finally no death, but this life of hair and nails. The body gone, the spirit quenched. But in the death, something still alive, expropriating space, causing time, creating endless movement. Through love this might happen, or sorrow, or being born with a club foot. The cause, nothing. The event, everything. In the beginning was the Word. Whatever this was, the Word, disease or creation, it was still running rampant. It would run on, outstrip time and space. At last the angels unseat God, unhook the universe. Any word contained all words. For him who had become detached through love or sorrow or whatever the cause. In every word, the current ran back to the beginning, which was lost, and which would never be found again, since there was neither beginning nor end, but only that which expressed itself in beginning and end. So, on the ovarian trolley, there was this voyage of man and bullfrog, composed of identical stuff, neither better nor less than Dante, but infinitely different, the one not knowing precisely the meaning of anything, the other knowing too precisely the meaning of everything, hence both lost and confused through beginnings and endings, finally to be deposited at Java or India Street, Greenpoint, there to be carried back into the current of life, so called, by a couple of sawdust moles with twitching ovaries of the well-known gastropod variety.